I've heard people say in a cult there's one guy at the top that knows it's a scam. In a religion, that person is dead. Basically saying that all religions are cults. So what is the difference between a cult and a religion? Is it that cut and dry? Let's talk about what all cults have in common and how they're different from religions. Let's get into it. Before we get into it, I just want to mention that YouTube has been really bad for a lot of people in this community lately. Demonetization is one thing. That's a big problem. It's scary to wake up one morning and see you made 33 cents that day, especially when you have rent to pay. But what's even worse than that is waking up to see that YouTube isn't suggesting your videos anymore. There's really no way to fix that. You can fix demonetization by crowdfunding through Patreon or something. But how do you fix YouTube just cutting your views in half one month? Even if you want to crowdfund, your message isn't reaching anywhere near as many people as it should be, or as it used to. So if you like the work I do and you want to make sure I can continue to do it, you can support me in a few different ways. I'm building up work outside of YouTube. If you want to host your website with me, you can contact me about it through my work email address, which can be found in the description. It's pretty advanced. If you don't know cPanel, Bash, or FTP, it might not be for you. I typically set up and maintain WordPress websites, but if you know what you're doing, you can use the space for whatever you want. You can also support me through Patreon or Teespring. Those are really good ways. And finally, if you're into gaming like I am, and more specifically retro gaming, you can check out my retro YouTube channel, Telltale Retro, where I talk about retro game history. And you can check out my store, where I sell 3D printed game controller stands, which I 3D print myself. I also sell handheld console and game display stands, all modeled and printed by me. The link to that is in the description. I sell controller stands for the Nintendo Switch, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4, Sega Saturn, and lots of others. Not to mention the display stands for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and 3DS, cartridge stands for basically every console, and all kinds of other stuff. So if you want to support me, that's a solid way. As I said, all links can be found in the description, so give it a look. So what's the difference between a cult and a religion? I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of the BITE model, but in case you haven't, let me explain what it is. The BITE model was written by Stephen Hassan, who wrote the book Combating Cult Mind Control. I think it was written in 1989. He details his life in the Moonies, a religious and political cult most active in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The book is a standard read for ex-cult members to this day. But in that book, he talks about the BITE model. BITE is an acronym. It stands for Behavior Control, Information Control, Thought Control, and Emotional Control. It's basically a big list of logical fallacies and cognitive distortions that people commonly use to justify bad behavior and unreasonable beliefs. Any psychology major will vouch for the items on the list. Let's take a quick glance through the list and see what's involved. As we go through it, think about how strongly this stuff applies to your group. If it does any of this stuff to a high degree, or even at all, you should put some thought into possibly leaving the group. Unless that's forbidden, of course, then you should definitely stay forever. Anyways, the first category is B in BITE model, behavior control. Here are the points. Promote dependence and obedience. Modify behavior with rewards and punishments. Dictate where and with whom you live. Restrict or control sexuality. Control clothing and hairstyle. Regulate what and how much you eat and drink. Deprive you of 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Exploit you financially. Restrict leisure time and activities. And require you to seek permission for major decisions. Next on the list is the I in BITE, information control. Deliberately withhold and distort information. Forbid you from speaking with ex-members and critics, discourage access to non-cult sources of information, divide information into insider versus outsider doctrine, generate and use propaganda extensively, use information gained in confession sessions against you, gaslight to make you doubt your own memory, require you to report thoughts, feelings, and activities to superiors, and encourage you to spy and report on others' misconduct. Here's the list for the T in the BITE model, thought control. Instill black versus white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking. Now, I've been doing this work for 3 years. I saw something that all cults have in common that wasn't on the list, so I added one right here under thought control. Overreaching or exaggerated importance placed on events or ideas. Like Jehovah's Witnesses separating their people from a major cultural event like Christmas over something as minor as supposed pagan roots. But interestingly, not having a problem with wedding rings, even though that has pagan roots too. Next on the list, still under thought control, is change your identity, possibly even your name, use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought, induce hypnotic or trance states to indoctrinate, teach thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts, allow only positive thoughts, use excessive meditation, singing, prayer, and chanting to block thoughts, and reject rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt. And finally, the E in BITE model, emotional control. Instill irrational fears or phobias of questioning or leaving the group, label some emotions as evil, worldly, sinful, or wrong, teach emotion-stopping techniques to prevent anger or homesickness, promote feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness, shower you with praise and attention, or love bomb you, threaten your friends and family, shun you if you disobey or disbelieve, and finally, teach that there is no happiness or peace outside the group. Pretty much every religion does everything on the BITE model to one degree or another. It's just that some groups are way worse about some of them than others. So what's it take to be a cult? In my opinion, to be a cult, there has to be some centralized person or group of people enforcing or encouraging the logical fallacies and control mechanisms. For example, a lot of these points apply to flat earthers, using loaded language or cliches to stop complex thought, thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts, black and white us versus them thinking, withholding or distorting information, discourage outside sources of information, and others. But I don't call flat earth a cult because, for one thing, there's no centralized person or group of people that enforce the rules, beliefs, and control mechanisms. In my opinion, to be a cult, it has to have at least that. Now, that being said, that stuff can be self-enforced, and in a lot of cases it is, even in full-blown legitimate cults like Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, and others. And it can be just as destructive to people, whether it's enforced by a hierarchy or not. So I call it a cult-like mindset as opposed to calling it a full-blown cult. But in my opinion, one of the most relevant and distinguishing features of a cult, one of the things that makes cults different from religions, is the second point under behavior control. Modify behavior with rewards and punishments. I did a whole video on Catholicism and how the BITE model applies to it, so I'll use it as an example for this one. In Catholicism, you're expected to report thoughts, feelings, and activities to superiors in the form of confession, at which point the information given in confession is used to assign something called penance. They have you go through steps to quote-unquote regain God's favor. It usually comes in the form of praying the rosary a number of different times. So you'll take your rosary beads and touch each bead on the necklace. Every time you touch a bead, you repeat a certain mantra, the Our Father prayer or the Hail Mary prayer. That's modifying your behavior with rewards and punishments, and it's using excessive meditation to block thoughts. In my opinion, that one is required to be a cult, modifying people's behavior with rewards and punishments to form out a Christian personality, if you will. When you meet a cult member, you'll know. It isn't like meeting a religious person. It's a core part of their identity. I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably been visited by Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons before. Have you ever noticed how they're just a little too smiley and happy? They have glassy eyes, and their smile doesn't go away the entire time you talk to them. It's borderline creepy. That's the cult personality shining through. That's the end result of that behavior modification. Jehovah's Witnesses call it the Christian personality, or the new personality. In fact, they wrote a whole article about the new personality in one of their magazines from August 2017. It's called How Do We Put On and Keep On the New Personality? Here are a couple excerpts from it. It says, the new personality refers to a personality that is created according to God's will. Developing such a new personality is within our reach. Why? Because Jehovah created humans in his image and thus made it possible for us to reflect his beautiful qualities. There are a few subheadings under the intro, which are basically detailing which qualities they want the cult members to have as a result of the behavior modification. The first one's called You Are All One. It mostly talks about how Jehovah's Witnesses want to draw the us versus them line on members of the religion versus outsiders, rather than drawing it on race or some other attribute, which leads to Jehovah's Witnesses being very accepting of everybody as long as you're a member. They're very guarded with non-members, and most of the time, they flat out refuse to talk to ex-members or critics. The next subheading is Tender Affections of Compassion and Kindness. In practice, this translates to being very timid and largely lacking confidence. Unfortunately, a lot of the time when this stuff is programmed into people from a young age, like it was with me, it's there to stay. There's really no practical way of deprogramming something like this out of somebody. The paragraphs under the subheading say things like, to support one another in our suffering or adversity, we need to have genuine compassion. Feeling tender compassion will move us to acts of kindness. These aspects of the new personality will help us imitate God and be of comfort to others. The next subheading says, Clothe Yourselves with Humility. So they're basically trying to program in an ultra-humble attitude. It says, remember that even a once perfect spirit creature sinned because he allowed himself to become filled filled with pride. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe that people should be prideful, but it goes a little beyond that, because pride is listed as one of the 7 deadly sins. Lots of Christians believe pride is a bad thing, but Jehovah's Witnesses outright believe that you shouldn't be proud of your accomplishments. You shouldn't want to show off in any way. It's a step past standard Christian doctrine, and that adds to the separation between themselves and the rest of society, because their goal isn't to excel in their careers, it's to wait it out and survive until Armageddon comes. You shouldn't be proud of the grades you got in school. You should only go to school exactly as you're legally required to. You can go to trade school or something if you feel like it's necessary to support your family, but college is pretty much out of the question. You should be devoting your entire life to converting people to Jehovah's Witnesses in preparation for the end times. The next subheading is Clothe yourselves with mildness and patience. It says, people who are mild and patient are often considered weak. How far such reasoning is from the truth. These beautiful qualities originate from the most powerful person in the universe. A little further down it says, Jesus was mild and patient right up to his wrongful execution. While suffering agonizing pain on the torture stake, Jesus prayed that his Father forgive his executioners because, as he said, they don't know what they're doing. 2 more subheadings. The second from the last one is, Clothe yourselves with love. It says, love is also patient and kind and does not get puffed up. Strangely, they quoted 1 Corinthians 13:4 there, but it's an inaccurate quote. They have their own translation of the Bible, which has some really significant problems, but I'm not going to get into that right now. For now, I'll just read straight from the verse they cite. 1 Corinthians 13:4 says, love is patient and kind, love is not jealous, it does not brag, does not get puffed up. The NIV version of the Bible, which has problems too, but I think is a lot more accurate than the Jehovah's Witnesses version, words it a little bit differently. It says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. I feel like Jehovah's Witnesses are reading into this verse a lot more than they should be. Anyways, the final subheading under the new personality article Jehovah's Witnesses wrote is entitled, Continue to be Made New. It says, each of us should ask himself, what more can I do to strip off and keep off the old personality? We need to pray fervently for God's help and work hard to overcome any attitude or practice that will prevent us from inheriting God's kingdom. We also need to ask, do I continue to be made new in my dominant mental attitude? Putting on and keeping on the new personality is an ongoing process for all Christians until we're able to do so to the full. Imagine how wonderful life would be when everyone we know is clothed to perfection with the new personality. Does not get more cult-like than that. That's really the defining feature as far as I'm concerned. They've defined their goal of putting on a new personality, and they set up a system of rewards and punishments to enforce it. You can see this kind of thing in some religions, usually to a reasonably mild extent, at least compared to this. This goes above and beyond standard religion. You can usually tell somebody's personality's been modified because of that glassy, smiley expression on their face. They've ceased being Owen Morgan, and they've become Brother Morgan, Jehovah's Witness, or Elder Morgan, Mormon, or Owen Morgan, the Catholic. You see behavior modification in lots of different religions, and to varying levels. But as I said, it isn't the only factor. There are lots of other control mechanisms and logical fallacies involved in being a cult member. Just keep a lookout for this kind of thing. If you see a celebrity with huge fans who employ any of these fallacies, like black and white thinking or suspension of critical thinking, like Cosby fans, for example, or if you see a group discouraging people from talking to critics or ex-members, think about it. Think about what you're seeing and think about the group as a whole. Why don't they want you communicating with ex-members? I went to a super moderate Methodist church once. Now, extremism varies from church to church, so don't take this as a blanket endorsement of the Methodist Church. But I don't really go there anymore. Guess how the church acts toward me now? They don't care. It doesn't matter to them if I go or not. It doesn't matter if I used to go or not. It's irrelevant. If you're part of a group that discourages you from talking to ex-members, then there might be a problem. Maybe try thinking long and hard about your continued membership. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Don't forget, there are a few ways you can support me. As I said in the beginning, Patreon and Teespring are solid ways. But if you want to get something back for the donations, then you can use my servers to host your website, email, and other stuff. Or you can check out my online store where I sell 3D printed controller stands, game cartridge stands, or game console stands for things like the Nintendo Switch controller, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Game Boy Color and Advance, Nintendo DS and 3DS, Atari, NES, Super Nintendo, and a lot more. It's a good way to support me, so give it a look. And don't forget to check out my Telltale Retro channel, where I talk about retro gaming history and retro game reviews. And last but not least, check out my podcast. All links are in the description as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.